Welcome to Walking with the Ancient Masters, a podcast dedicated to exploring the ancestral shamanic practices of the Shipibo people of the Amazon rainforest. Shipibo shamans are renowned for holding the most advanced knowledge for healing with the master plants of the Amazon, and their extensive skill for working with ayahuasca, the powerful plant medicine healing brew, dates back hundreds, if not thousands, of years. I'm Becky Griffin. Join me and other facilitators of the Kaya Shobo Healing Center as we explore the remarkably transformative healing powers of the Shipibo shamanic traditions. We'll be talking with experienced practitioners, master healers, and community members about their life-changing experiences with ayahuasca and the Shipibo Master Plant Dieta practice. For more information, visit kayashobo.com. That's CAYASHOBO.com. In this episode, I talk with Jen Smee, Berkeley-based psychotherapist with over 14 years of experience studying and working in the field of somatic psychotherapy. Jen holds a bachelor's degree in cultural anthropology from the University of California and a master's degree in somatic psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies. She's also one of Kaya Shobo's most experienced facilitators of Shipibo Master Plant Dieta healing. Join us as Jen and I explore how both Master Plant Dieta and formative psychology can bring about lasting emotional and psychological healing. Let's dive in. Welcome, Jen. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Why don't we start with learning a little bit more about the particular focus that you have in your psychotherapy work? I know that you work with, is it formative psychology? Perhaps you could describe for us a little more about that. What is formative psychology?
Yeah, so formative psychology is a method or offshoot of somatic psychology, which is a more inclusive and integrative approach to working with people, it includes the body in the therapy. So whereas traditional talk therapy engages one aspect of people, namely their mind and their story, somatic psychology, and in particular formative therapy, engages the person as a embodied body-mind being. And formative psychology, what I love about it so much is that it studies how we are alive. And the operative word is how. In this case, it's the how is the cornerstone, the keystone of this way of working. And so we study how people live themselves, how they are in the world. That's generally.
Kind of in a nutshell. So why the word formative? Is it related to, how the identity gets developed from our first days, or like what's this formative word referring to?
So life self-organizes. All of life self-organizes. So when we are in the womb, there's a process, an organization process or a forming process that's happening. That's just life doing its thing. From a sperm and an egg make a baby. And, what starts as two cells implode, become one, and then the event happens of conception, and it sets off, already a kind of a map of forming. And so that happens in the womb, and it happens in relationship to the womb of our mother. So our forming process is in there with the womb, and there's already a relationship set up of a kind of a personal formation as well as the outside or external environment. And so then when we're born, we continue to grow and develop, so we're babies, but eventually we'll become an adult. And how we grow ourselves is going to be both that already existing kind of thrust of life, coupled with how, like, what we come up against in our environment. So formative therapy sees that these kind of developmental patterned ways of being is an aspect of our forming.
And determinative of how we tend to think and engage with our environment, how we perceive it, how we respond to it. I mean, the psyche is so essential to all of our existence. It's difficult to kind of separate it, obviously, from what you're describing in the physical form. But I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about this, about how this study of how we form, both from the map of what we're given and the environment that we grow within, how that plays out in terms of how we perceive and interpret our environment, how we react to it, respond to it.
In many ways, I hesitate to speak in like a definitive term about it, because I think that there's so much that we don't know, and so much of it is all still really a mystery. But in formative therapy, yes, the idea is that from our physical experience comes everything else. So the psyche and the mind are aspects of us as bodied beings. So it's really primarily physical. And when we're born, we don't have thoughts because we haven't yet developed language. That doesn't come on until about 2 years old, more or less. And so, like, a narrative is not present in the first 2 years of life. However, those 2 years are incredibly formative. They're like how we learn to reach. They're how we learn to stand and be in the world. They're how we start to differentiate ourselves and move out into the world and extend. And all of that is done without a lot of narrative.
More of a feeling sense.
Yeah, much more felt, more felt. And there's the negotiation of impulse there. So, little kids are much more impulsive, and they're just kind of doing. And then it's really the environment that helps bring a kind of understanding of limitation, what their limitations are. Then the mind comes more online, or narrative and language. And that's when we start to give story to things that have already been set in motion around basic patterned ways of being.
My thinking then, listening to you, goes to, okay, and what about trauma? What about traumatic moments, that may happen before we reach that age of 2 or after, and how we process those experiences? At least I know, thinking of my own life journey, that, memories that felt painful and traumatic were often mental interactions, psychological interactions, ideas that were given to me or perhaps imposed on me that I had difficulty processing. So I'm curious to hear, where does psychological experiences fit in this development of the identity, even from a young age?
Trauma is not the event itself, or really developmentally, it can be a series of events. It's not that itself, it's our response to it. It's what we do in the midst of an overwhelming experience. And so trauma is fundamentally something that happens in the body first. And then often, I think what can happen is that because it's overwhelming, we have a kind of fracturing, and the only place we have to go can be up into our mind. It can be up into the head, mind, or it can also just be up and out straight, where there's quite a bit of dissociation. The people that are able to overcome trauma has to do a lot with how they respond, how they feel empowered to actively respond to the situation when it's happening. And those of us that are more stuck in trauma, whether it might be really severe kind of trauma, or it might be just we didn't have the resources, or there could be lots of things. We do what we can with when we're overwhelmed, and overwhelm happens with kind of a flood of sensation and feeling, and brain can't process it all, so it just kind of disconnects. So I think then the healing is how to make a bridge between the kind of story experience and the story we tell, and the bodily experience, which often can be really at odds with each other.
Yeah, I would like to concur with what you're saying. As I was listening to you before you got to describing how it's often that we're not resourced, or how well we're able to process what's happening. I think for myself in my childhood, I don't think that my parents or the people around me themselves had the skills to process or to role model that to me. Mm-hmm. And it absolutely felt like, as an adult revisiting those times, if I'd understood some basic factors about desires and boundaries and certain things, that I would have been way better equipped to respond to what ended up being trauma for me. It might not have been, if I'd had those capabilities, or if they'd been role modeled to me a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that the word understanding is like, I almost would say learning. If you had been taught, like, the learning happens, we may form an understanding later, but it's also it's really going to be in what we do, our responses, and in a way an action.
Mm-hmm. Like submitting to a circumstance, for example.
Submitting, yeah. Withdrawal. Some people make themselves really big. Some people, like, it involves like more of us than just, we can't think our way through things,
Yeah. Yeah, and that disassociation that you talked about, I've seen that with some people. It's kind of almost like the spirit just checks out and disappears from the experience. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, this area is really fascinating to me, because in my own journey with dieting, Master Plants, and supporting many other people, it seems to me that the plants, they really go into these places where we are living from, where we perhaps have forgotten, or we're not so conscious that there's choice there. And the plants kind of remind us, hey, this way that you've formulated of being isn't the only way. And it's creating limitation and discomfort. So I guess that's kind of what you're aiming for in the somatic psychotherapy work that you do, is kind of a greater awareness of the ways that we have come configured that maybe are limiting us.
Yes, absolutely. Awareness is a big part of it, and it's once we are aware, then what? It's how we learn how to be different, to actually do things differently, and so that's the other piece.
This is curious to me, because awareness. What do we mean by awareness? There's. Okay, if I think about my last trip to the jungle, which I recently returned home from, I was there for almost a month. And most of the insights that were coming to me during that stay were around a pattern of being a way of being in my life that I've known about for a very long time. I could observe it quite clearly in myself, this kind of handling things, managing the details of my life. But on this occasion in the jungle, the plants kept showing me really clearly, in a way that was more bodily. I was experiencing myself managing things, handling things, and that deeper way of feeling how I'm being, and its limiting impact, particularly on my spiritual self or emotional self or creative self, was quite different to just being aware of it. I think I've been aware of it for a really long time, but it wasn't until I could, really sink into it that I can understand more fully how limiting it is and where it came from. That it's not just a way of being in life that helps me manage my life, that it's come from, trauma.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that there's a function to everything that we do, for sure. So all of the responses that we have, all the ways of being that we live, I think or that are possible for us, I think are serve a purpose. And to your other point, I think that experience is really where it's at. The contact, making a kind of contact with our kind of like soft animal self, or maybe sometimes not so soft, but and not just like contact, but then moving from that place, like how you described how you were learning about yourself in the jungle, how you were experiencing yourself, like you did a thing, and so that it's that. And I think when we feel what we're doing really deeply, that's an important step, because a lot of people will feel like they have some awareness and some discomfort, and then the movement is to change it or to be different. Like, oh, I just got to stop doing this, or I have to do, I don't want that anymore, or whatever. But it's kind of bringing curiosity and attention to what we actually are doing is such an incredible teacher, because it also helps us. It's helped me, especially somebody who likes to really be in control of things, learn that life is larger than I can think it or than I know. And so if I can let whatever is going on be, and then through that start to learn how to have influence, like, well, okay, do I like this, or what works for me, or what doesn't work? Because it's not to say that any of the ways that we learned how to be are wrong. They can just be limited. So then it's okay, well, how do we do it differently so that we have a little more choice? And yeah, experience, I think, is the key.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's Dieta is very experiential. I think that's why I'm so wedded to it, because it's not just thinking. You're actually engaging with a physical substance, a plant that has more than just a physical impact. It's waking up emotions, or waking up your awareness of emotions that reside within, and it's waking up a kind of clarity of perception on certain ways of thinking and communicating, expressing, and so on. And it's doing it in this really visceral, experiential way, which you're not going to get necessarily stuck in loops. You're feeling your way through it, and it's so beautiful. And it's amazing how each different master plant it really seems to evoke a particular type of emotion, feeling, thought pattern for you to kind of work through. Like I was dieting this plant, Sensitivo, which the Shipibo call Tanti Zhao, which means calming medicine. And it's a medicine which calms the mind. And it's interesting because with that calming effect, it's like the diet was allowing me to calm myself into my body and see this way of being, of handling things, which I've always just done. And you're right, I've tried to modulate that by saying to myself, okay, that's too much doing. Now I need to do resting, which is not the same as actually feeling. Well, actually, what this diet showed me was it gave me the feeling sense of how that doingness was super tied in with my ego, my sense of self-value that I needed to be doing in order to feel like I was worthy of being here. That was one aspect. And another was how imbalanced it is. Like, it's not that managing things and doing is necessarily bad, but that the way I'd become so hooked into it is beyond addiction, just like a default way of engaging in any situation, was so out of balance that there was no room really for my artist self. And beautifully, the diet showed me dreams of my artist self as another person, another girl who didn't want to talk to me because I wasn't giving her attention. And it did it in a really emotional way. So I'm like meeting myself, the artist, and seeing how myself, the manager, is not allowing myself, the artist, to flourish. So it's none of it's like, well, it's ideas because I'm interpreting what's happening, but it's very experiential. I was just going to ask you if that's similar to how you've experienced Dieta. Is that how it goes for you? And have you had that sort of, kind of deep dive into aspects of yourself with different master plants?
Yes, for sure. My first diet was with coca, and this diet really helped me see my mind a lot and work with my mind. But yeah, what you say about the diets kind of encouraging different aspects of ourselves to grow, or to maybe be even attended to, because I think that often just the attending to is growth,
Absolutely.
So, like your artist self that's been ignored, for sure, that attending is already something. It's like saying hello, and yeah, I have definitely found, and with Morosa too, this plant was such a beautiful diet for my self-esteem and self-love. And I remember having the experience at Kaishobo in the jungle of actually feeling happy. Not happy in a conceptual way, but happy like I'm actually just walking and I'm looking at the beauty that's all around me, and the flowers and the plants, and the sense of myself kind of softer, was not something I had yet experienced in that way. So
yeah, or probably expected from the diet. I recall when I dieted Morosa, it made me laugh afterwards, actually. I think I had a pretty immature idea of what self-love is. I had this unconscious idea, which became conscious once I started the diet, that Morosa, which I'd heard helps with self-love, would help me be more likable in the eyes of others. And the reason I could see that was that when the diet was opened, I woke up the next morning, I felt like a 13-year-old wanting to write in my diary. I just wanted to be with myself. I just wanted to be with myself and tend to myself and write about my dreams and write about my passions, whatever, just be by myself. And the whole diet was this beautiful wrapping up in myself.
Mm.
And actually, it really helped my marriage at the time, because I think prior to that diet, I had been quite needy of emotional attention.
Mm.
And that was an imbalance in our relationship. And I did a 6-month diet with Marosa. And I remember Miguel coming into my bedroom now and then and saying, like, are you okay? I haven't seen you for ages. And my feeling was like, I'm fine. What do you want? And it was just really interesting. It just rebalanced things. But I had a similar quality of experience to what you're describing. It was very pleasurable to just be with me.
Mm.
And that was a new understanding of self-love, and no longer an idea of self-love, and a weird idea at that, but actually an experience of it.
Yeah, I think there's this aspect of relationship. I think that all the plants, ayahuasca was the best teacher for me in teaching me about relationship. But then all of the master plants, it's like I'm forming relationships with each one of them that are sometimes like a teacher or my therapist, or sometimes like a best friend, or sometimes like a pretty firm parent. And so this kind of like what you do like this with your hands encircling you. And I feel like a lot of my learning too has been both in somatic therapy, formative therapy, and with the plants, has been that kind of encircling of myself and the kind of self relationship that is available at that point. And when I'm talking with my clients, I always talk to them about like forming a layer between, like, that's like they've got themselves and then a layer and then their social world. So there's this kind of like self-relating that happens first, and then the relationship with the external world, that can be something to grow.
Yeah, and it is consistent with, the Shipibo Maestro's clear instruction that when you are dieting with a master plant, you ideally need to be in isolation, in a cocoon, if you like, or in a womb. It is described like a pregnancy, and often the dreams reveal that. There's often dreams of the diet like a baby, and many other aspects. And I think that the experiencing of the relationship with the diet, and which is really experiencing a relationship with ourselves through the dream space, which when we're dreaming, we don't know it's not reality. It's like we are actually experiencing ourselves with the support of the plants in the dream space. And actually the maestros approach dreaming like a ceremony, where we can learn conscious dreaming, lucid dreaming with dieting ultimately. But then when the diet's closed, after this kind of gestation period, it's when we talk about the diets are kind of born. But rather than go into that, I was hoping to hear from you about, the fact that so much of the diet work is like that. It's like encouraging isolation, self-learning, self-experiencing. It brings to light that in our culture, we're so far from that. And when we talked earlier about how, the way we process trauma, how able we are to respond to it throughout our lives, I could see my own parents weren't able to respond to the trauma that we were all exposed to. And I don't think their parents were. I mean, I think coming out of world wars and so on, they were really the opposite of well equipped to deal with trauma. I feel like our society has a massive legacy of disconnection, disassociation, being ill-equipped to really process loss and pain and so on. And I feel like that's maybe partially why the diets for us Westerners are so like grounding within ourselves, because that's so needed, so missing for us. I'm curious to hear what you feel about that.
Yeah, agreed. You know, we live in such a mental world. And I think that part of that is a valuing of, production and progress, whatever that means. And, the mind, the kind of valuing of the mind as the ultimate, kind of arbiter of things. But I also think that there's been such a deep fracture within us as a species in a lot of ways, that is where there's that connection, a deep connection to ourselves and to nature, has been really either really challenged or, for some people almost lost.
Totally broken. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's built into our culture too. I recall my daughter in kindergarten being taught, one of the goals of that first year of school was for her to demonstrate an understanding of the difference between imagination and reality. And to not be able to demonstrate that difference would be a concern. And okay, maybe that's valid, but what's lost with that perspective, without balancing it with, well, what's inside the imagination? Let's go in there. Let's find all the beautiful stuff that's wanting to be expressed and moved and processed through the imagination. That's not part of it. Not part of our culture, our system of thinking.
Well, for sure. I think our that's a whole topic in and of itself. But one other thing I wanted to speak to too was the, how you're talking about trauma and then the generational aspect of trauma. And, what they have been finding, is that trauma is actually, it can be passed down epigenetically through the family line. So then there's this aspect of intergenerational trauma. And I think working somatically with people is a way of working with that. There can be some real depths reached with how to shift how that's living in us or how we're living that. But also the diets, I think, they can go right to that, and in a way that I don't know that somatic work can so deeply get at,
because it's like written into the DNA. For sure, these things live within us, and sometimes it's really intense stuff.
Sure.
Yeah. Especially where there's been entire peoples that have been, decimated and abused, and this really a lot of healing work to be done there. Yeah.
Agreed.
Thank you for listening to this brief sponsorship notice. Walking with the Ancient Masters is sponsored by the Kaya Shobo Healing Center near Iquitos, Peru. Kaya Shobo helps people deeply heal and safely connect with plant wisdom in the true way of the Shipibo shamanic knowledge tradition. In small group retreats of no more than 11 guests, you can experience highly personalized treatment and begin your path of transformation with the wisdom of the master plants. Kaya Shobo's experienced practitioners and advanced Shipibo master healers will treat and support you as you begin to heal trauma, clear energy blocks, and dive into your spiritual path. We invite you to safely explore this incredible ancestral tradition in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. Visit kayashobo.com for more information. That's CAYASHOBO.com.
We've touched a little bit on how the plants kind of come into these forms that we have and how there's different types of plants, and we've discussed a couple of them ourselves, like coca and morosa. But Maybe we could touch on a few others and how they match with certain types of configurations that you come across in your work, like that people tend towards certain types of person, types of being, types of identity. And maybe there's plants that might be worth exploring as potential medicines that can help people. Do you come across, like, do you in your work, in your approach, look for certain types of identities or configurations?
There's a lot of different things that can exist in people in different ways. So I look first and foremost of how people are, the word I use is organizing, like how they organize themselves, how they're moving, how they carry themselves, what maybe patterns of tension, or maybe like kind of more of a diffuse way of being, like a real lack of ground or lack of structure. So I look first and foremost at these things. And then because we're so incredibly complex, each individual person, the way that things play out is not going to be like a predetermined kind of mold, For instance, somebody that's feeling really victimized by their circumstances can show up in somebody that's narcissistic as well as somebody that's codependent. So like, and I've seen it in people. I do think in terms of identity, absolutely, but I think of it in terms of like an amalgamation of lots of different factors that then play out in a really kind of unique way for each person. So I would think more of plants in terms of how to address certain ways of being for a person. So somebody that is a kind of lacking boundaries, for instance, lacking boundaries can show up in lots of different organizations. It can show up in somebody like me who's much more like rigid and tight, or it can show up in somebody that's going to be much more of a kind of expanded, overextending type person. But I think of like Ahusacha for something around teaching kind of like more about boundaries. But I mean, all of them in a way are going to do that because boundaries are an aspect of self-relationship. But they'll do it from different angles.
Which is how the maestros diagnose and choose plants for, especially during a retreat at Kaya Shobo, we have a limited 2-week period to really give a person an intensive dieta treatment. So they have to choose, something that is obviously the priority, and what they focus on predominantly is what is revealed in the body. So we didn't talk about this during our chat, and I'm really looking forward to other chats diving deeper with you on different aspects of, the transformation of every aspect of our being with plants. But certainly the way we are configured it shows up in the body in different ways. And when things are out of balance, that's when illnesses and problems appear. And so the maestros are seeing that in their vision. And this is another thing that's so beautiful about working with plants, is that the plant that's perfect for a particular physical issue or imbalance or sickness matches the emotional or psychological kind of manner that is related to this form in the body. So you mentioned Ahusacha, for example, and it's very invigorating, it's very strengthening, and it's great for clearing out the lung space. And often when a person has suffered a lot of loss and has experienced a lot of grief but hasn't been able to clear that, it lives in the lungs. And the lungs can get quite congested, and the person can be debilitated by the lungs not working so well. So Ahusacha kind of expulses this, mucus in the lungs, clears out the lungs, brings heat and strength and warmth and clearing of grief, at least in my experience. And from there, the capacity to identify the need for boundaries, as well as the capability to articulate them confidently, peacefully. These are things which naturally evolve with more time with Ahosatcha. But it'll be chosen when the maestros see, oh, the lungs are congested and there's a lot of grief in the lungs, for example.
Yeah, and even so, like in a formative way, what you did with showing a lot of grief and how there was a kind of concave posture and way of holding yourself maybe in and down, or a kind of a collapsing. And then how Ahosatcha comes through and opens the lungs, and kind of through the inside out, there's an expansion outward and an expelling, but also a kind of
renegotiating.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. From like one kind of way to a different way. And so formative work does that too. That's the work to move. How does somebody move actively, participatorily, if that's a word, through being collapsed to being more kind of standing on their own 2 feet, and then allowing the extension and things to be moving through them more fully. And then there's this aspect of, this is how I think one of the many beautiful ways in which the diets just infuse that kind of work is there's Ahosatcha to help, with that process, like that kind of encouragement and support.
Yeah, it makes me wonder about the piñons. Piñon Blanco and Piñon Colorado are often prescribed, for addictive tendencies, and when the bloodstream is really loaded with toxins. And these 2 plants are pretty intense purifiers, and are known to help heal neurotic thinking and very negative thinking. I mean, that's a more kind of sharp, like piercing kind of medicine, I would say, which has a lot of light, but it's also pretty challenging on the body, and kind of goes right to the, straight to the core of the addictive issue, which is quite different to Ahosatcha. And
my experience with Piñon Blanco was very much like that. But there's always the aspect of choice, because Piñon Blanco, it can go right there to the site of neurotic thinking and clear to addictions and addictive patterns, which it really helped me with a lot. Piñon Blanco was amazing in that regard for me. I highly recommend it for people.
But you're saying here that it's not that it's obligatory. Transformation is still up to you.
That's right. Yeah, there's that's it, is that there's always, I remember being presented with opportunities all the time for choice with, you could do this in the familiar way, or you could do it like this. And the plant, Piñon Blanco, was such an incredible support for me, because it's like, it just helps show me, really what's happening. And then I can, see more clearly the choice points.
Yeah, this is a very important aspect of this work, is choice. And I think, it's one of the, perhaps the most important focus area that we have as facilitators at Kaya Shobo, when we're helping people learn about what is dieta and navigate the experiences, because it's such a felt experience. It's can be difficult to take a bird's eye view of ourselves. We're kind of in it. And so as facilitators, we're there helping people to identify, okay, so it's not so straightforward. It's not like a plant comes to you in your dream and says, here you go, you have a choice, you can be like this or like this. I mean, the dream that I described with my last diet was pretty clear, but it's not always like that. In fact, for the most part, I would say what happens mostly with dieta practice is that the plant tends to amplify a certain behavioral pattern, a certain way of being. It amplifies it within you. And if you don't have a lot of experience with it, you can just take it on face value and feel stronger in your convictions that this is the way to be, without understanding that, well, it's kind of being revealed to you. It's being shaken loose, and in the shaking loose is where you get to observe, okay, I live like this. I perceive like this. I behave like this. I choose like this. It's mysterious. It's not necessarily laid out for you. So this choice factor is really important. And I have seen some people go weird ways with this. Not only are we experiencing patterns within us that are perhaps out of balance or problematic, but we're sometimes being given visions and gifts by the plants that are very seductive and we can become enamored by. So it's both the light and the dark, right? And if we're not keeping this harmony between seeking to understand how we're formed and where we want to go, then we can go weird with it.
Oh yeah. I think that absolutely what you're saying, what I've seen in myself and with other people, is there's a real amplification of ways of being, particular ways of being that are really habituated. And the thing about habit is that it, flies below the level of our consciousness. It's the way our brain streamlines information and what we do. So to me, the real important thing is how to start to really get curious about our habituated ways of being that the master plants are absolutely going to be bringing up. We will be doing those things. It's not like it just things change and then all of a sudden we're different. We're not robots. Like, we can't be programmed in that way. I think for myself and in all the work that I do, learning how to not know, like really not knowing. There's no possible way that I'm going to know where I'm going when I begin working with a Master Plant Diet. Like, I might have some idea, oh, it will help me this way and that way, but I'm not going to know. And so anytime I think I know, or anytime I see other people thinking that they know, it's really, I think it's a lesson. I think ultimately it's a lesson. And to come back to just, wait, what am I doing here? What am I actually doing? And how do I feel? And really just not knowing, but being curious, bringing attention to and being curious, and then immersing in the experience of it. I think those are really essential aspects of growth, personal growth and growth in diet.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the most common teaching of the plants, a kind of foundational and central aspect of teaching of the plants. There's lots of different aspects of teaching, but the central one is look at, get curious. What are you doing? What are you thinking? What are you saying? What are you perceiving? And you can see different models of how we do that. Like, maybe we're thinking about what's wrong in our environment, because that makes us feel more sure that we're going to protect ourselves, that we're going to be okay because we're being aware of what's wrong in our environment. Or perhaps we're thinking about how we can be a good person. If I speak this way, or if I do this thing, or if I uphold my responsibilities in a certain way, then I can be sure I'm a good person. I'm going to be worthy and valued and find a place of belonging. Or perhaps it's something more dark. Maybe we have had a lot of pain and loss, and we're grieving that, but we're somehow stuck there, and that's the only thing we know how to do is just grieve that loss. I feel that the diet practice gives us an opportunity. It really sort of says again and again and again, hey, look. And yeah, don't just take what you're sure about how you see or feel about things as correct, as accurate, but be curious about what it is that you're doing. And then as we allow ourselves to feel into it, and as we learn more about Dieta practice, we start to see it's being unearthed, it's being exposed, it's being cleared, especially with the help of the treatment from the maestros. And these things leave us in waves of energy, leaving clearer landscapes and more choices.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when there's a more habituated or patterned kind of way that's really deep or core, there's this aspect of transition that's really important in formative therapy, and I think it's also important with the plants, where it's how you move from one place to another. And so those things that are so deeply embedded, I think those are always going to be, like, in a way, places that we could return. And so it's not necessarily, I think, that those things disappear altogether. It's, I don't think, like, the plants just, like, it's like, whew, okay, cool. Now I can move much more freely. I mean, it does that to a degree, but there is always going to be how we do that and how we keep doing that. It's the integration piece, I think, of diet and ceremony, is all the ways that we've been helped and the things that we've been shown, is how then we go and live that and continue to live that.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that with the example I gave you of the most recent diet, revealing to me aspects of myself that, like I said, I've known for a long time, but haven't really been able to shift very much, that they're so core, they're so foundational to my identity and my sense of self-value, that now, in my 18th year of working with this tradition, this medicine, I'm, for the first time, really experiencing the structure, the shape of that, and how that lives inside of me, what it feels like. It's slow, for sure. And it's both impactful and powerful, but also subtle and slow.
I mean, and I think that the slow aspect of the working with the diets, and then doing your own personal work, is slowness is just such a vital aspect of it, because, well, pace is one thing. We live in a world that is very fast paced, and a kind of expectation that things will be happening rapidly. And I think people can bring themselves to their own personal work and to diets with a kind of an expectation that they should be moving quickly, or they want to be moving really quickly. They want the change to happen, and it needs to happen now, and it needs to happen fast. And I can remember, even in the beginning for me, I would think, I got to transform, and I felt this push, but I finally kind of started to question, what is it that I'm wanting to transform into? Like, who is this that I think that I'm going to be? And I think that it's kind of the proverbial eyes are bigger than our stomach. There's a lot that we can see, with our eyes. There's a lot that we can observe, and there's a lot that we take in with our eyes. And yet how we digest that and how we metabolize, like metabolizing literally means we make something that's not us. So, the digesting of new information, of new ways of being, of new feelings, new ways of feeling ourselves, and new kind of range of that is a slow process. Things take time to be digested and to move through us and to then become a part of how we live ourselves in the world and how we experience ourselves too. And it just has to be that way.
It has to be slow, in order to be real. Real healing happens slowly. Thank you so much, Jen. This has been really rich and beautiful, and I look forward to hosting you again on the podcast again and again, because, as I shared, I really feel that the psychology of Master Plant Dieta practice is perhaps the most important central part of this work, and you're such a great teacher in that area. So thank you very much for your time and your wisdom, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to be here.